Welcome back, you beautiful, unbreakable force of nature. Take a breath. Not because you're overwhelmed, but because something has finally settled into place. Something you were never supposed to hear has surfaced. And now that you have, the past 5 years are starting to rearrange themselves in your mind. Someone who broke the silence, not loudly, not drum it, just enough for the truth to slip through the cracks they worked so hard to seal. And the moment it did, everything you once questioned about yourself began to make sense. You always felt it, didn't you? That subtle wrongness, that low hum beneath conversations, the way rooms felt different after you left them, the way smiles lingered half a second too long, the way you told yourself you were overthinking, you tried to be generous, you tried to assume the best. You tried to quiet the part of you that noticed patterns instead of promises. But now you know behind your back there were conversations you were never meant to hear. Not one or two, not misunderstandings, coordinated narratives, repeated discussions where your name became a topic instead of a person, where your intentions were analyzed without your presence, where your reactions were framed without your context, where your silence was interpreted, edited, and repackaged into something that served them. And the most unsettling part isn't that it happened, it's how calmly it happened, how ordinary it was for them. They didn't start out cruel. It never does. It started with concern, with just wanting to understand, with I don't know how to say this but, and slowly, subtly, concern became consensus. Consensus became certainty, became permission. Simone finally admitted it, not because you demanded answers, not because you exposed anything, but because guilt, when carried long enough, rots from the inside. Because it becomes heavier than the lie it's protecting. Because at some point, pretending costs more than telling the truth. They confess to the quiet meetings, the casual check-in that weren't casual at all. The moments where they smiled at you and then turned around and reinterpreted everything you said for an audience that wasn't you. They confessed to how your name came up in group conversations as a way to bond, as something shared, as something agreed upon. And suddenly you understand why certain doors close without explanation, why certain people pulled away without conflict, why you felt isolated without ever being confronted, why support thinned out without you doing anything that deserved it. It wasn't your imagination. It wasn't your instability. It wasn't your sensitivity. It was coordination. They shaped a version of you that could be discussed without you being there to correct it. A version that made their discomfort feel justified. A version that made their envy sound like responsibility. A version that allowed them to feel aligned with each other instead of accountable to you. And here's the part that stings in a quiet way. You trusted them not blindly, not naively. You trusted them because you assumed people spoke directly when something was wrong. You assumed honesty was the default. You assumed that if someone smiled at you, it meant the same thing privately as it did publicly. You weren't wrong for that. You were intact. They used your openness as access, your vulnerability as material, your humanity as something to be managed instead of respected. And while they were busy managing the story of you, they never noticed what you were actually doing. You were surviving. You were learning how to stand in rooms where the temperature kept dropping. You were learning how to self-regulate without validation. You were learning how to trust yourself even when the feedback made no sense. You were learning how to be quiet without disappearing. That's the part they never planned for. They assumed confusion would break you. That doubt would make you pliable. That isolation would make you come back smaller, more agreeable, more willing to accept whatever version of yourself they handed back to you. Instead, you grew clearer. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped chasing understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped performing emotional labor for rooms that benefited from your exhaustion. You didn't get louder. You didn't get dramatic. You got precise, and that terrified them. Because when someone doesn't react the way the script expects, the script falls apart. When someone doesn't defend themselves against an accusation they were never given, the accusation has nowhere to land. When someone keeps moving forward without demanding justice, the injustice starts echoing back to the people who created it. The confession made something else painfully clear. This wasn't about you doing something wrong. It was about you being something they couldn't control. Your authenticity made their performance feel fragile. Your consistency exposed their contradictions. Your ability to sit with yourself made their need for agreement obvious. And instead of rising to meet that discomfort, they chose to manage it by managing you socially, emotionally, narratively. But narratives require maintenance. They require repetition, agreement, silence from the person being discussed. And you unknowingly gave them the one thing they needed most. Time, not because you were weak, but because you were building something they couldn't see. While they were having conversations about you, you were having conversations with yourself. While they were deciding who you were deciding what you would no longer tolerate. While they were reinforcing a shared story, you were shedding the need to be understood by people who never asked you directly. That's why this truth arriving now feels different. You don't feel vindictive. You don't feel hungry for confrontation. You don't feel the urge to gather everyone in a room and demand accountability. You feel steady because the truth didn't give you power. It confirmed the power you already had. It didn't heal you. It explained why healing took the shape it did. It didn't change your path. It clarified why you stayed on it even when it felt lonely. They are unraveling now. Not publicly, not explosively, but internally. Because once a confession exists, it can't be unheard. Once a crack appears in a shared lie, everyone feels it. They're starting to realize that what bonded them together was never truth. It was avoidance. It was fear. It was the comfort of agreement over the courage of integrity. And you're no longer part of that equation. You don't need their apology to be whole. You don't need their explanation to be free. You don't need their regret to validate what you lived through. The truth is moving on its own now, and you're already somewhere else. You survived the confusion without losing yourself. You walked through social fog without becoming bitter. You learned discernment without becoming closed. You learned solitude without becoming isolated. And that's the quiet victory no one can take from you. You're not standing here waiting for justice. You're standing here because you kept going, because you chose clarity over chaos, because you refused to contort yourself into something smaller just to stay included. This isn't the end of the story. It's not even the confrontation. It's the moment before the next chapter where you finally understand why everything unfolded the way it did, and why you don't need to go back and explain anything to anyone. You're already moving forward, and the truth is finally trying to catch up. It's strange how that works, isn't it? How the truth never rushes, never panics, never forces its way into the room. It just walks at its own pace, knowing it will eventually arrive wherever it's needed. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to drag it behind you like proof. It follows quietly, correcting the record one realization at a time. What you're feeling now isn't shock anymore. That past it isn't rage either. That phase came and went when no one was watching. What you're feeling now is orientation, like standing at the top of a hill after a long climb and finally seeing the full landscape of where you've been. You can trace the path now, every wrong turn, every moment you blamed yourself for things that were never yours to carry. Remember how often you replayed conversations in your head, wondering what you said wrong? How you tried to adjust your tone, your boundaries, your expectations, thinking maybe if you were softer, clearer, quieter, more accommodating, things would settle. You weren't adjusting because you were flawed. You were adjusting because the environment was unstable. And you were the only one trying to stay honest inside it. That confession didn't just expose what they did. It exposed how much emotional labor you were doing alone. You were carrying the weight of coherence in a space that thrived on distortion. You were trying to stay grounded in a room that kept tilting the floor. Anyone would have felt disoriented there. Anyone would have felt disoriented there. Everyone would have questioned themselves. But look at what you didn't lose. You didn't lose your values. You didn't lose your capacity for empathy. You didn't lose your sense of self even when it was constantly being reframed without your consent. That matters more than you realize. Because now as the truth begins to circulate, not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly, you're seeing something else happen. People are starting to hesitate before repeating the old narrative. Conversations feel awkward where they used to feel confident. There's a pause now, a second of uncertainty, a quiet recalibration. Not because you demanded it, but because lies age badly. And the thing about coordinated stories is that they rely on momentum. Once that momentum slows, once one person steps out of line, the entire structure weakens. Everyone starts wondering who else knows, who else remembers things differently, who else noticed the inconsistencies but stayed quiet. You're not part of those conversations anymore, but you can feel the shift. The air carries it. The tone changes. People don't look you in the eye the same way. Not out of superiority, not out of dismissal, but out of something closer to recognition. Like they're finally seeing you as a whole person instead of a concept. And here's where your growth shows. You're not tempted to step back in and explain yourself. You're not tempted to gather receipts or correct the timeline or clarify every misunderstanding. You don't need to, because the version of you they discussed doesn't exist in your body anymore. You outgrew it while they were busy defining it. That's the part that keeps you steady. You've already grieved the loss of what you thought those connections were. You already sat with the loneliness. You already did the work of rebuilding trust internally when it couldn't be found externally. So when the truth arrives late, it doesn't destabilize you. It simply confirms something you learned the hard way. That clarity doesn't always come with company. You're different now in ways that are difficult to explain, but impossible to undo. You notice how selective you've become. Not closed, not guarded, just precise. You don't overshare to create closeness anymore. You don't perform understanding to keep the peace. You don't abandon your own perception just to stay aligned with the group. You've learned that alignment without integrity is just a slower form of self-erasure. And because of that, you move differently, you listen longer, you speak less, you trust patterns more than apologies. You let people reveal themselves over time instead of filling in the gaps for them. This isn't cynicism, it's earned discernment. Some people will feel that immediately. They won't know why conversations with you feel quieter now, heavier somehow, more intentional. They'll mistake your calm for distance, your boundaries for disinterest, your neutrality for judgment. But you're not judging, you are observing. You've learned the difference. The truth that's catching up to you isn't here to pull you backward into old dynamics. It's here to close a loop, to release you from the last remnants of self, doubt that lingered in the background, to remind you that the confusion you felt wasn't a character flaw. It was a signal. And now that signal has been validated, what you do with that validation is where your power really shows. You don't weaponize it. You don't turn it into bitterness. You don't shrink people the way they tried to shrink you. You integrate it. You let it deepen your trust in yourself. You let it refine your boundaries. You let it inform who gets access moving forward. You let it become wisdom instead of armor. Because armor is heavy. Wisdom travels light. There will be moments, subtle ones, where someone tries to reopen the door, where they test the waters with nostalgia, or softened language, or vague acknowledgments that something wasn't handled well. They may want reassurance. They may want absolution. They may want to feel less uncomfortable with what they participated in. You don't owe them that, not because you're cruel, but because you've already done your part. You don't need to punish anyone. Life is already doing the sorting. People who build connection through distortion eventually have to live inside it. People who avoid directness eventually drown in implication. People who outsource their conscience to a group eventually lose the ability to stand alone. You learned how to stand alone without losing yourself. That's not a small thing. So, as the truth continues to move, you keep doing what you've been doing. You keep choosing environments where clarity is normal. You keep investing in connections that don't require you to disappear to belong. You keep honoring your intuition without making it anyone else's responsibility to understand. You don't rush forgiveness. You don't cling to resentment. You let time finish what it started, because you've already crossed the hardest threshold, the one where you stopped needing external confirmation to trust your own experience. Everything after that is integration. You may never get a moment where everyone acknowledges what happened in unison. There may never be a neat ending where all the pieces are explained out loud. And surprisingly, that no longer bothers you, because peace doesn't require consensus. It requires coherence. And you have that now. You know who you are. You know what you lived through. You know why it felt the way it did. The truth didn't arrive to change you. It arrived to free you from questioning yourself. And as you continue forward, lighter than you've been in years, you don't look back to see who's finally catching up. You don't slow your pace to make the story easier for anyone else to process. You just keep walking, not away from the past, but beyond it. You foreign. Would you say love to the foreign speech? Foreign speech, yeah. For God, for the heart of it, Daenerys.